Captain Leora Vena stood on the observation deck of the starship Arender, her eyes scanning the endless expanse of stars. The galaxy had grown familiar over her decades of service, but today a new presence unsettled her. The fleet's AI had assigned her a human officer for the first time in her career, a species she had been trained to respect, but never truly understand. Humans were unpredictable. They relied on instincts, emotions, and a strange kind of bravery that her species considered reckless. Leora had always thought that such traits were weaknesses. Now one of them would be under her command. Lieutenant Aiden Cross arrived quietly, his uniform slightly wrinkled, his boots clanking softly on the metallic deck. He carried an air of calm that surprised her, as if he belonged here, despite the vast differences between his species and hers. His face, framed by dark hair and thoughtful brown eyes, held an expression that combined curiosity and cautious confidence. When he greeted her with a slightly awkward but genuine smile, Leora noticed something immediately. This human did not bow to hierarchy with fear, nor did he try to impress. He simply existed, and that simple presence made her uneasy in a way she could not explain. The other crew members whispered quietly among themselves. Some were skeptical, others openly doubtful. A human officer had never performed under extreme conditions like those Leora had faced daily. Yet, as the days went on, Aiden's uniqueness became apparent. The first real test came during a navigation exercise. The ship's automated system had detected an anomaly in the starfield, a distortion that even Leora's advanced sensors struggled to interpret. The other officers debated endlessly, calculating every possibility with careful logic. Meanwhile, Aiden stepped forward, touched the control panel with hands that seemed too ordinary for such advanced technology, and within moments he found a solution. Leora watched in silence. He had done something her best engineers had failed to accomplish in hours. And yet, he had done it with ease, almost instinctively. There was no arrogance in him, no boastfulness. Just a simple, effective solution. She felt a stirring of something she had long suppressed: curiosity, admiration, and perhaps a hint of fear. As the days passed, the human's presence began to affect more than just the ship's operations. Leora noticed subtle changes in her own behavior. She caught herself explaining strategies in simpler words, something she had never done before. She laughed quietly at Aiden's offhand humor, something she rarely allowed herself. She even began to notice how he moved through the ship, how he observed the crew with careful attention, noticing details others ignored. Yet, not all moments were easy. Aiden's habits were strange, from his insistence on human food in the galley to the way he questioned routine procedures. At first, Leora found this irritating, but soon she realized it was not defiance, it was observation, curiosity, and reasoning in a way that was entirely human. Where her species relied on logic and pattern, Aiden relied on instinct and perception. And time after time, his instincts proved correct. One evening, Leora stood alone on the observation deck again, watching a distant nebula swirl in colors no human had ever named. She felt a strange sense of anticipation and unease. Aiden had changed something fundamental in the ship, in the crew, and even in her. She could not yet name it, but she felt that nothing would be the same again. For the first time, Leora understood what it meant to face the unknown, not with fear, but with a cautious hope. The human assigned to her was not just another officer, he was a variable she had never accounted for, a force that might disrupt everything she had known about order, strategy, and control. And deep down, she realized she was curious to see where this human would take her. The crew, and perhaps the galaxy itself. From that day on, the Arender felt different, alive in a way it never had before. And as Aiden moved through the corridors, unaware of the quiet storm he had stirred, Leora understood one undeniable truth. When a human was assigned to her, nothing would ever be the same. The mission to Thaler 9 was considered routine by most officers, but Captain Leora Vena knew better. The planet had been in conflict for decades, and diplomacy there was fragile, delicate, and dangerous. As the Arender descended into orbit, tension hummed through the ship like electricity. Leora's crew moved with practiced precision. But she noticed the way Lieutenant Aiden Cross watched everything: the flicker of lights, the subtle shifts in communication signals, the patterns of alien behavior. He didn't just observe. He absorbed, calculated in his own strange human way. When they landed, the gravity pressed against their suits like a heavy weight, and the air smelled of ozone and scorched earth. The Thaler 9 leaders were already in the central council chamber, their elongated limbs folded in ritualistic poses. Leora began her usual opening speech, her voice calm, deliberate, filled with reason and authority. Yet something felt off. The council members were restless, suspicious, their eyes flicking toward the exits as if expecting a trap. Aiden, standing slightly behind her, whispered under his breath, "They're hiding something. I can feel it." Leora frowned. Humans spoke of feelings in ways her species considered unreliable. And yet, she noticed his gaze scanning exits and corridors, noticing the smallest inconsistencies in the room. His instincts, she realized, were sharper than her trained eyes. No one could have predicted what happened next. From the shadowed balconies, a group of rogue faction soldiers leapt down, weapons glinting in the dim light. Panic erupted. Leora's first instinct was retreat, to use shields and protocol to save the diplomats and crew. But Aiden moved differently. He stepped forward, his body fluid and confident, drawing attention. He grabbed a weapon from a nearby stand. But instead of shooting recklessly, he used precision and timing, knocking the attackers off balance and creating a path for the council members to escape. Time seemed to slow for Leora as she watched. Every move Aiden made was calculated, yet impulsive. Brave, yet risky. She had trained her entire life for moments like this, relying on careful plans and probability. But the human operated on intuition, courage, and instinct, a combination she had always dismissed as weakness. And yet, it was saving lives in real time. The clash ended as quickly as it had begun. Rogue soldiers were subdued, the council secured, and Leora felt her pulse still racing from adrenaline. She glanced at Aiden, whose chest heaved, but whose eyes held calm satisfaction. The crew looked at him with awe and disbelief. Even Leora couldn't find words. This human, messy, emotional, unpredictable had succeeded where she alone might have faltered. Later, back in the ship's debriefing room, Leora reviewed the situation with her officers. "We could have handled this differently," she said carefully, though she knew her words were half-hearted. Aiden had already suggested alternative strategies, ones she hadn't considered. And all had proven effective. Alone in her quarters, Leora sat by the window, looking at the swirling storms of Fowler below. She realized something unsettling. Humans, with all their unpredictability, could achieve results that logic and planning alone never could. The way Aiden moved, thought, and acted, it challenged everything she had believed about control and order. And yet, beneath her admiration, a quiet worry stirred. Humans were impulsive. They were brave to the point of danger. Could she trust someone whose instincts defied every precaution she had ever learned? The answer, she knew, would come soon enough because this human was not going anywhere. For the first time in her life, Leora felt that working with someone could be more than strategy, more than duty. There could be unpredictability, emotion, even inspiration. And somehow, she understood that the galaxy itself might never be the same with this human beside her. Aiden entered quietly, carrying a small datapad. "Captain," he said softly, "I think they'll want to meet again soon. And I have an idea that might prevent the next attack before it happens." Leora studied him, noting the mix of courage and cleverness in his eyes. She nodded slowly, a rare spark of emotion breaking through her disciplined exterior. "Show me," she said, and in that moment, the mission and the universe felt different. The human assigned to her was changing everything. And Leora realized there was no turning back. Days after the Thaler-9 mission, the crew of the Arender moved through the quiet of deep space. The stars stretched endlessly outside the observation deck, a silent reminder of the vastness they were exploring. Captain Leora Vena found herself standing there more often than she had before, not because of duty, but because of the presence of Lieutenant Aiden Cross. She didn't fully understand it, but something about him lingered in her mind. Aiden spent his hours differently than the rest of the crew. While officers ran simulations or analyzed data, he wandered the corridors, observing. Sometimes he stopped by the engineering bay, asking questions that seemed simple but revealed deep insights. Other times, he sat with the crew, listening more than speaking, catching details others overlooked. Leora noticed that the crew had begun to respond to him, not just because he was competent, but because there was a subtle warmth in his presence that encouraged trust. One evening, Leora found herself in the zero-gravity training simulator. She floated through the chamber, practicing maneuvers for upcoming missions. Aiden joined her, moving in a way that was both careful and instinctive, adjusting his body to the shift. NG currents of artificial gravity with ease. "You move like you're dancing," she remarked, trying to mask the surprise in her voice. He laughed softly, a sound that felt strange yet comforting in the metallic space. "I guess humans do that. Adapt. You can train for anything, but sometimes you just feel the movement instead of thinking about it. Leora watched him closely, feeling a spark she hadn't expected. Humans were impulsive, emotional, and unpredictable. Yet in that unpredictability, there was an elegance she couldn't deny. She realized that Aiden's way of thinking, reacting, and surviving was something she had never experienced, and it challenged everything she believed about strategy and discipline. Their growing bond became evident in the smallest moments. Aiden noticed when Leora was tense, offering quiet words of encouragement. He corrected minor mistakes in a gentle way, never condescending, only helping. And in turn, Leora found herself explaining decisions and strategies in simpler terms, not because she had to, but because she wanted him to understand. They began to function as a team, each complementing the other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. Then came the solar flare incident. The Erender's sensors detected a sudden burst of energy from a nearby dying star. The radiation could cripple their systems within minutes. Panic surged among the crew, and alarms blared through the corridors. Leora's mind raced through all possible protocols, calculating probabilities, but the solutions felt slow, bureaucratic, insufficient. Aiden stepped forward. Calm, precise, and confident, he guided the engineers and crew with clear instructions, improvising a shield reroute using components no one had thought of. Leora followed his lead, astonished at how effortlessly he adapted to danger. When the crisis ended, the ship intact, she felt an unexpected rush of emotion, gratitude, awe, and something deeper she struggled to name. This human had not just acted, he had inspired everyone around him to act better, faster, smarter. That night, Leora couldn't sleep. She stared out at the stars, reflecting on the human beside her. He was unlike anyone she had ever known. Fearless yet thoughtful, unpredictable yet effective, emotional yet wise. She realized that he was not only a valuable officer, but a force that was reshaping her world, changing the way she thought about leadership, strategy, and life itself. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Aiden entered, holding a simple cup of tea, the human ritual that seemed oddly comforting in the cold ship. "Thought you might need this," he said quietly, offering it without ceremony. Leora accepted it, noting the warmth in his gesture. In that small moment, she understood the truth. Humans were not just soldiers or officers. They could see, feel, and act in ways that inspired those around them. And this one human, in particular, had already begun to inspire her. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to a human than the galaxy's protocols and fears had taught her. Perhaps there was something extraordinary hidden in their simplicity and courage, a potential that could not be measured by logic alone. And as she looked at him, standing calmly in the dim light, she realized that her world, her crew, and her life would never be the same. The bond between them was forming, subtle yet undeniable. And Leora knew deep down that it would shape the missions ahead in ways she could not yet imagine. The Galactic Council had summoned the Erender for a mission unlike any Leora had faced before. A vital energy core, capable of powering entire colonies, had been lost in the derelict ship Oblivion. Drifting at the edge of the outer rim, every crew before them had failed. Some never returned. Leora's instincts told her this mission would be brutal, requiring careful planning and precision. Yet beside her, Lieutenant Aiden Cross exuded a quiet confidence that both unsettled and intrigued her. As they approached the Oblivion, the derelict loomed like a shadow against the void. Its hull was scarred, metal twisted from centuries of neglect and violent encounters. Sensors registered active security systems, but the patterns were chaotic, almost random. Leora began her standard assessment, calculating angles, pressure points, and probabilities of success. Aiden, however, scanned differently. He walked slowly along the bridge console, eyes narrowing, noticing subtle variations in the ship's energy readings. "The paths aren't fixed," he said softly. "The ship reacts. It's alive in a way they didn't plan for." Leora frowned. Her species valued logic above all. Chaos was dangerous. Yet Aiden's instinct told her something her calculations did not. Survival required trust, not just strategy. Reluctantly, she followed his lead. Inside Oblivion, the air was thick with the scent of decay and electricity. Corridors twisted and shifted as the security systems activated. Doors slammed, lights flickered, and alien traps snapped from shadows. Leora moved with her usual precision, relying on experience and calculation. But she quickly realized her strategies alone were insufficient. Aiden, however, flowed through the chaos with a fluidity that was impossible to predict. He used instinct to dodge collapsing floors, instinct to sense where traps would spring, and instinct to guide Leora around danger she hadn't even noticed. When a security drone appeared from nowhere, Leora raised her weapon instinctively, but Aiden stepped forward, disabled it with a clever improvisation that required no tools other than his quick thinking and timing. They reached the chamber, holding the energy core. But the final challenge awaited, a containment lock powered by multiple energy nodes, each rigged to trigger lethal defenses if disturbed. Leora calculated every sequence, her mind racing. But Aiden walked closer, touching a panel that seemed random, and then another. A series of clicks and hums later, the nodes stabilized. The energy core was safe. Leora blinked in disbelief. He had solved it with intuition, improvisation, and timing, a human solution. Unpredictable yet perfect. In the quiet aftermath, Leora looked at Aiden, seeing not only competence but courage and creativity fused into one being. She realized something profound. Humans could see possibilities that her species, trained in logic and precision, could not even imagine. They could adapt, improvise, and act in ways that defied probability, but still succeeded. Back on the Erender, as they prepared to depart, Leora found herself alone with him in the observation deck. "You make it look easy," she said, voice soft but filled with respect. Aiden shrugged, a small, unassuming motion. "I just trust what I feel. Sometimes the right choice isn't the one the numbers suggest." Leora stared at him, realizing she had learned something important, not from manuals or simulations, but from him. Humans were not just unpredictable. They were capable of solutions born from creativity, empathy, and instinct. And this one human had already changed the way she saw leadership, strategy, and life itself. That night, as the stars moved silently outside, Leora understood that the mission had tested more than their skills. It had tested her assumptions, her beliefs, and her willingness to embrace the unpredictable. And as she watched Aiden, calm and composed, she felt a quiet certainty. With him by her side, the universe no longer felt like something to merely control. It felt alive, unpredictable, and full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The human assigned to her was no longer just an officer. He was a teacher, a challenge, and perhaps even without words, an inspiration. And Leora knew, deep in her heart, that the missions ahead would never be the same again. The victory at Oblivion should have been celebrated. Yet tension simmered aboard the Erender. Some officers whispered doubts, questioning why a human was allowed to influence strategy. Why Captain Leora seemed to rely so heavily on Aiden Cross. Leora, who had spent her life enforcing discipline and following logic, felt the subtle pressure of authority questioning her judgment. It gnawed at her. She had always believed that emotion and instinct were dangerous. Yet here she was, depending on them to save lives one evening. As the crew moved quietly through the corridors, Leora confronted Aiden in the training bay. The lights cast long shadows across the polished floor, and silence hung between them like a heavy weight. "You're reckless," she said firmly, trying to keep her voice steady. "You put yourself and the crew at risk. You act on instinct instead of reason. That could have gone terribly wrong." Aiden studied her, his brown eyes calm and unwavering. "And yet," he said softly, "everyone's alive, Captain. Isn't that what matters most? Sometimes the right choice isn't the safest one. Sometimes survival depends on seeing what others are too afraid to notice." Her jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, to cite rules, protocols, and statistics. But deep down, she knew he was right. Humans had a strange way of perceiving the world, seeing opportunities in chaos, finding solutions where logic alone would fail. Leora had trained for decades to control every variable, but Aiden taught her something she hadn't expected. Flexibility could be just as powerful as discipline. The tension extended beyond the two of them. During daily briefings, officers debated strategies and second-guessed every move Aiden suggested. Leora felt torn. Her loyalty to the crew's traditions clashed with her growing admiration for the human's instincts. Yet every time she hesitated, every time she doubted Aiden, he proved her wrong in subtle ways. Small improvisations, quick decisions, and acts of bravery kept them ahead of danger, time and again. One night, after a particularly long mission in a volatile sector, Leora found herself standing alone on the observation deck. Stars stretched endlessly before her, silent witnesses to her internal struggle. She reflected on how much the human had changed her perspective. He had challenged her assumptions, forced her to see that strict logic wasn't always the path to success. And yet, she also realized how fragile this balance was, how easily fear and distrust from others could undermine everything they had accomplished together. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Captain." Aiden's figure appeared in the doorway, calm and unassuming, yet somehow grounding. "You're thinking too much." She shook her head. "I'm thinking exactly as I should. Humans act on emotion. That scares people." He stepped closer, voice steady. "Sometimes fear is useful. But letting it control you, that's dangerous. You're stronger than you think. And you're stronger than you know because you learn, because you adapt. That's what makes you a great captain." Liara studied him in silence. The words were simple, but they struck something deep inside her. She had spent her life controlling everything, every mission, every outcome, every emotion. And yet here was a human, someone she had been trained to consider unpredictable, teaching her lessons she could not have learned in decades of study. The realization hit her with quiet force. This human was not a liability. He was a catalyst, forcing change not only in her thinking, but in the crew's perception of humans. He was rewriting rules, not breaking them. And though part of her resisted, another part of her felt exhilaration, a spark of hope, excitement, and awe. As the stars gleamed beyond the observation deck, Liara finally allowed herself a rare smile, faint but genuine. "Maybe you're right," she whispered, almost to herself, and somewhere deep in the ship's core, in the quiet hum of engines and systems, the truth settled like a star igniting. With a human assigned to her, nothing would ever truly be the same. The next mission was unlike any the Arender had faced. A star system on the brink of collapse threatened to destroy an entire civilization. Liara's mind raced through protocols, calculations, and contingencies. She had prepared for disasters before, but nothing in her career could compare to the magnitude of this one. Evacuation, resource management, energy redistribution, every variable was critical. Yet as she studied the holographic map, her eyes kept drifting to Aiden Cross, standing quietly beside her, scanning the projections with a mix of focus and quiet intuition. "The calculations alone won't work," he said softly, pointing to an unstable cluster of energy nodes near the planet's core. "We need to act now, but not just with precision through improvisation. We need to trust more than the numbers." Liara's first instinct was caution. Her species had trained her to rely on calculation, not human intuition. But the memory of oblivion and every other time Aiden's instincts had saved the crew tempered her hesitation. "Show me," she said, voice steady but laced with curiosity. Together, they formulated a daring plan. Evacuation pods would be rerouted through temporary wormholes, some unstable, but navigable if approached with care. Alien allies they had never contacted before were enlisted, guided by Aiden's calm negotiations and insight into their instincts. Liara marveled at the human's ability to think on multiple levels at once: logistics, diplomacy, and improvisation, all combined with a courage that seemed effortless. As the evacuation began, chaos erupted. The planet's magnetic storms interfered with communications, and debris from collapsing moons struck without warning. Liara's carefully calculated strategies faltered under the unpredictability. Panic rippled through the crew. She felt the familiar surge of control slipping. Then she saw Aiden, calm, focused, moving between consoles and crew, directing, guiding, and sometimes physically rescuing those in danger. When a pod's guidance system failed and began plummeting toward the surface, Aiden leapt into action, using strength and quick thinking to redirect it just in time. Liara's heart raced as she realized the magnitude of what he was accomplishing. He was not just surviving chaos, he was controlling it, bending it to save countless lives. Watching him, Liara felt a strange, powerful emotion, awe mixed with admiration, and something she could not fully name. Humans, she understood, were extraordinary not because of their technology, but because of their courage, intuition, and the way they inspired others to act beyond their limits. When the last civilians were safely evacuated and the star system finally stabilized, Liara walked to the observation deck. She gazed at the distant stars, still glowing despite the chaos below. Aiden joined her quietly, his expression calm but thoughtful. "We did it," he said simply. "Yes," she replied, but her voice carried more than relief. It carried realization. "You did more than just act, Aiden. You changed how I see the galaxy. And how I see myself." He looked at her, a small, understanding smile touching his lips. "You adapted. That's why we succeeded. We adapted together." For the first time, Liara understood the truth the AI had hinted at when assigning him. Humans were more than unpredictable creatures. They were catalysts for growth, for courage, for hope. They could see paths others could not, inspire loyalty and bravery, and transform even the most disciplined minds. In the quiet of the observation deck, Liara realized that she had been transformed. The rigid control she had clung to for decades had shifted. She now understood that the galaxy was not meant to be conquered through logic alone, but navigated with heart, courage, and trust in the unexpected. And as she glanced at Aiden, standing quietly beside her, she finally accepted it fully. This human had not just saved lives. He had changed her, reshaped her, and shown her a universe filled with possibilities she had never dared imagine. The revelation was clear, undeniable, and powerful. With him at her side, nothing and no one would ever be the same again. The galaxy felt different now. Captain Liara Vena stood on the bridge of the Arender, watching stars streak past as the ship sailed into uncharted sectors. The missions, the crises, the chaos, they had changed everything. And at the center of that change was Lieutenant Aiden Cross, the human she had once underestimated. He had not only saved countless lives, but had reshaped her understanding of leadership, courage, and trust. The crew moved with a new rhythm, one born from collaboration between human instinct and her disciplined command. Officers who had once doubted Aiden now watched him with respect, awe, and curiosity. He had a way of seeing possibilities others ignored, a calm in the face of danger that inspired everyone around him. Liara noticed how even the most rigid officers softened, how fear turned into determination, and how hope began to feel tangible. Even in the darkest corners of space. As she walked through the corridors, she found Aiden in the training bay, adjusting a simulation with ease. He looked up, offering a small smile. "Captain," he said, "you've changed too." She paused, considering his words. "I suppose I have," she admitted, the corners of her lips lifting in a rare smile. "I never believed that a human could teach me so much." He shrugged, casually, but there was a quiet gravity in his presence. "You weren't just learning from me," he said. "You were learning from yourself too. You just didn't know it until you trusted someone else to show you another way." Liara felt the weight of his words settle within her. It was true. She had spent decades relying on logic, order, and predictability. And yet, the galaxy had taught her that life could not always be measured, calculated, or controlled. Sometimes it had to be felt. Sometimes it had to be lived. And Aiden had shown her that courage, kindness, and trust were as powerful as strategy and skill. Later, the crew gathered on the observation deck, watching a brilliant nebula explode into vibrant colors, a cosmic dance of light and energy. Liara stood beside Aiden, silently observing the beauty. For a moment, no words were necessary. They had faced storms, collapses, and impossible choices. And now here, in the quiet of the universe, there was peace, a fleeting, fragile peace, yet one that felt earned. "Do you ever wonder," Aiden asked quietly, "what would have happened if I hadn't been assigned to you?" Liara looked at him, her mind replaying every mission, every impossible challenge, every time he had saved her, the crew, and even her beliefs. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would have survived, but I wouldn't have learned. I wouldn't have changed. Nothing would be the same, not like this." He nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. And for the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the deeper truth she had been resisting. Humans were extraordinary, not because of power or skill, but because of their spirit, their courage, their ability to inspire, to adapt, to love, and to hope. The Arender moved forward, slicing through space like a vessel of light and promise. Liara felt a surge of confidence, not just in herself, but in the potential of the universe itself. With humans at their side, with Aiden at her side, the impossible felt possible. And as she glanced at him, standing quietly yet unwaveringly, she realized that this mission, this journey, had done more than test their strength. It had forged a bond between human and captain, between instinct and discipline, between heart and mind. Together, they had rewritten the rules of command, the limits of courage, and the definition of hope. The galaxy stretched endlessly before them, unpredictable and alive, but Liara no longer feared it. She had learned to embrace the